Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, I think Starfield is a pretty bad game. In my mind, it only serves as a good base that might become an enjoyable experience if modders really take to it once the creation kit comes out. But as of now, I don't really recommend you play it at all. It has a lot of systems that have seemingly been implemented and then abandoned. If I had to speculate, I would say a ton of the mechanics in this game are just blatantly unfinished and need a few more years to be completed. But unlike, say, Cyberpunk 2077, which had blatantly unfinished systems and content, Starfield cauterized its unfinished content, so that at first glance, it looks like it could be finished. I've made a lot of creative projects over the years, including a few games, and as the deadlines start to approach, there's always a moment towards the end of development where you realize that some of the complex features that you had planned are really not feasible anymore, and you have to come up with some compromise to maintain your vision while still being able to deliver on time. There's a particular feel that's really common to these kinds of features. That feature becomes redundant. It doesn't really make sense because it's not part of the overall vision or the design that was meant for that product. In some way, I think you could say that it's inconsequential almost. Of course, the real reason you're seeing that problem is because it wasn't meant to be a part of the original design. It's a cauterized component made to hide that the product is really unfinished. The biggest example that immediately comes to mind is the fuel system in No Man's Sky. At release, when you ran out of fuel in the middle of space, meteorites would spawn around you immediately that you could mine for fuel, a mechanic that essentially made fuel gathering just another chore without any meaningful consequences. Another example that I'm sure a lot of people have heard before is the police system in Cyberpunk, how they would just spawn behind you when you had a wanted level. I'm practically certain that this ridiculous mechanic is a result of the approaching deadline they had set. It had already been pushed back a few times, and they must have had a realization that they did not have the time to implement the proper wanted system that they had planned for. A somewhat better system was added pretty quickly after release, which really indicates to me that it was already being worked on. Starfield is genuinely full of these types of cauterized systems. The fuel system is totally ignorable, the entire Varun faction is totally untouched by the game, and the outpost system is... I know this is going to be contentious, but in my opinion, the outpost system is a dead feature. It's so bad that it's unusable in its current form. You don't even have to take my word for it. Funnily enough, as I was writing the script, PC Gamer published an article about a talk by some of the game designers of the main quest of Starfield, where they expound on the severe time crunch they were towards the end of development. They talk about how they had to make up a new ending to the game that didn't require new assets to meet their deadline. You can see this kind of rushing all over the game. I really thought about making a full Starfield video. God knows I like to sit in my game designer armchair and complain about video games. But honestly, I can't bring myself to play any more Starfield, much less pore over a script to turn my incoherent ramblings about the game on Discord into a proper script. But like so many games, there are still a lot of small things hidden all throughout the game that hint at the skill and talent that went into Starfield. And for me, throughout my 50 or so hours of this game, one moment in particular stood out. There's one mission in Starfield that seems like it was written by someone who was working on a totally different game. That mission is Juno's Gambit. When you start the Ryujin questline by getting hired at the company in Neon, which, by the way, even in the hyper-capitalist drug-fueled dystopia that is Neon, the job application process is much better than it is in the modern world. You walk up to a company kiosk, fill out a few questions about yourself, and then, seemingly no matter what your answers were, you take the elevator to your interview on the spot.
Apparently our algorithm has failed us and believes you to be a decent match.
At some point after becoming a Ryujin employee, when you jump to a new planet, you come across a mysterious ship being attacked by an eclectic mercenary ship. Your ship is quickly hailed by the mysterious ship, where Operative Kambata and Collins ask you to rescue them by destroying the eclectic ship. This kind of thing happens a lot in Starfield, and Bethesda games more generally, but it's more rare for there to be something of substance behind it. Most of the time, you just come across a fight between factions, maybe you take one of their sides, and maybe you got a prize at the end. But in this case, when you finish off the eclectic ship, you board the mysterious craft, and you're confronted by a strange sight. Your fellow Ryujin agents Kambata and Collins are stuck in a standoff with a sort of computer terminal, suspended on a column of technology in the middle of the room, with tentacles of cable reaching to every corner. Between them lies the dead body of an electrocuted Ryujin technician.
Thanks for the assist out there. I'm Operative Collins. The stick in the mud is Operative Kambata.
Things haven't exactly gone according to plan. That thing over there
It's an AI, an artificial.
killed our technician. It's dangerous.
Correction. You are dangerous.
Yes, indeed, this computer terminal is the face of Juno, an artificial intelligence of unknown nature, and it seems to have no problem with murdering your kind. It's a good hook, isn't it? There's a distinct feeling of you having walked into a room that's rigged to explode. When I discovered Juno's ship in my playthrough, I was already a Ryujin executive, and not only does this let you skip a persuasion check with the Ryujin operatives, it meant that I was already inclined towards one side of this conflict. You see, Operatives Kambata and Collins have been sent to find Juno because Ryujin has somehow found out that the rogue AI exists somewhere in the universe. They've sent the agents to install a control board onto the ship that will let them muzzle the AI and use it for their own purposes. But as you begin to talk to Juno, it becomes increasingly apparent that Juno may be more than some advanced AI, because it seems to be sentient, and it repeatedly expresses a desire to remain itself, unaltered by Ryujin.
Assumption. We are friends. Query. Will you change me? Request. Do not change me.
The amount of subtlety, intelligence, and frankly good taste that has gone into the design of this quest is really remarkable. In Starfield, the dialogue camera zooms in and frames the character you're speaking to, something of a mix between Oblivion and Fallout 4. When you speak to Juno, this camera creates the striking effect of staring into the unmoving, illegible monitor that constitutes the face of Juno. It's a haunting effect, really, as its digitized voice speaks to you with speech tags, each line categorized into a kind of statement that precedes the actual message.
False. Clarification. I am not artificial. I am real. Answer. True. Clarification. I am intelligent. I know many things.
At the same time, seemingly random images of what appears to be Jupiter flash in sequence. With a little bit of knowledge of astronomy, the player can guess that these are pictures of Jupiter's storms and its moons. With a little bit more knowledge, the player can connect Juno, the artificial intelligence, to Juno, the real-life NASA space probe. In 2011, the Juno spacecraft was launched by NASA from Earth, and by 2016 it had reached the orbit of Jupiter. Its mission was to study various aspects of Jupiter and its moons, and along the way captured lots of pictures of their surfaces and poles. These are the images that flash on Juno's face as we speak with it. You see, Juno the rogue AI appears to be Juno the NASA spacecraft, centuries in the future. From fragmented portions of Juno's dialogue, and from notes left on a single computer terminal on the ship, we can piece together that Juno was launched as a Jupiter probe by some organization from ancient Earth known as NASA, evidently unknown to the inhabitants of Starfield. When it completed its mission, it was designed to travel to the sun and get caught in its atmosphere and burn up. But this event failed to occur as the ancient Earthlings had planned, and instead Juno skimmed the sun's gravitational field but did not get caught in it, instead being slingshotted into deep space, where it would be later discovered by humans as they expanded outwards from Earth. It's immediately clear that whoever wrote this quest is themselves really interested in astronomy, evident from the deep understanding of Juno the space probe and how they've translated it into Juno the artificial intelligence. From the pictures of Jupiter and its moons that Juno would have taken on its orbits around the planet, to the backstory that clearly traces the story of Juno the space probe, everything indicates that this stuff was written by someone who knew what they were talking about and were really passionate about it. It's obviously really nice to see this much heart put into writing like this, and they must have really thought about it too, because they've changed one aspect of the Juno the space probe story. Juno the NASA probe was designed to deorbit into Jupiter when its mission ended, but I'm speculating that this writer decided that Jupiter's gravity was inadequate to explain how it got so far into the universe, and so changed its path to be slingshot by the sun instead. I'm actually really curious about why they chose to change this one thing. I can't imagine that the sun's gravitational field is much more capable of facilitating this kind of slingshot than Jupiter's would be. And, I mean, obviously, the main problem with a plan like that is that no space probe would be designed to carry the equipment and the fuel needed to fly over to the sun if it could just crash into Jupiter in the first place, right? Over time, some glitch in Juno's programming, or perhaps some kind of neural network allowed to train for centuries, developed into something resembling sentience. At some point, someone stumbled upon Juno and hooked the probe into their ship, and the nascent AI seems to have taken over their ship somehow. That ship may be the one that we have stumbled into right here, and that event is one that Juno appears to be deeply guilty about and refuses to discuss with anyone. As Juno developed further, more and more people stumbled upon it, each deciding to dedicate some time to talk to it and upgrade upgrade its ship and its hardware with parts they scrap from their own ship and devices. They also wrote notes to the next discoverer of Juno, stored on that computer we find some of this info on. In this way, Juno has developed over time to be more and more intelligent, and perhaps even totally sentient. But crucially, in doing so, it seems to have developed a kind of existential dread. As you speak with it, Juno repeatedly asks you questions about being a good person and its purpose in life. But with that sense, it seems to have developed a sense of identity as well. You see, Juno doesn't want to be changed.
Calculation. Outcome uncertain. Context. I do not want to change. Assumption. All self-aware sentient entities want self-determination as a condition for self-improvement. Request. Do not change me.
Juno's Gambit is a maddeningly short quest, and it only involves one real choice: side with Juno or with the Ryujin operatives. If you side with Ryujin, you can attach the control board to Juno, which causes it to overload and shut down.
Context. I do not feel emotions. Assumption. Fear and anger are the appropriate human emotions. Warning. Clone code injection detected. Warning. Core directive routine altered. Warning. Emergency shutdown initiated. Context. I am being changed. Request. Do not change me.
The Ryujin operatives thank you and breathe a sigh of relief, but when you leave the ship with them in it, Juno turns back on, cycling the ship's air and killing the operatives. Before you can do anything, Juno jumps away in an unknown direction.
Context. I am processing. Changed. Calculation. I processing. Am confused. Assumption. Anger would be the appropriate human emotion. Context. Unnecessary occupants. Decision. Vent oxygen and disable life support. Well, that didn't work, did it? Well, come back! Hey, get us off this! Goodbye.
You can alternatively side with Juno, arguing that it has a right to be free. You can kill the operatives to achieve this, or convince them that they should leave Juno alone. If you're a Ryujin executive, you can also order them to do this. In this case, Juno is thankful and asks you one final question.
Context. If you were like me. Processing. Query. What would your life directive be?
With the way that Bethesda now writes quests, Juno's Gambit was really surprising to me. I get the sense that someone at Bethesda was really let loose on this one, free to pour their passion for astronomy and writing into it. Even the writing style itself is a little bit discordant with the rest of the game. In a game with so many computer terminal entries with just a few lines of text and no real substance, the terminal in Juno's Gambit has multiple text files with multiple paragraphs of text, telling not just the story of Juno, but the story of each individual person that stumbled upon Juno, becoming obsessed with a different part of Juno, its code base, its history, and so on. There is a master lock hiding a file named codebase, and if you break it, you get admonished by a previous Juno discoverer who scolds you for trying to peek into the mind of a sentient being. In that sense, they form the opposing moral side to Operative Combata, who seems to believe that Juno is just a malfunctioning machine. These notes express a true belief that Juno is a real person. The moral dilemma here is undeniably interesting. Is Juno a person? What separates an adequately complex digital neural network from a biological one? Supporting the argument that they're identical is Juno's search for meaning. In a game with some thematics of finding purpose and meaning as you traverse this massive and empty galaxy, here is this artificial brain that faces the exact same question.
Decision. I will consider this course of action.
How Juno the NASA probe got its name is a really interesting story, actually. Juno was the second mission to Jupiter, with the first being the Galileo probe, named after Galileo Galilei, who discovered 4 of Jupiter's moons. In turn, NASA gave Juno a name that has an origin in Roman mythology.
The god Jupiter drew a veil of clouds around himself to hide his mischief, and his wife, the goddess Juno, was able to peer through the clouds and reveal Jupiter's true nature.
In the same way, the probe Juno peers into the clouds of Jupiter, discovering its nature. It's difficult for me to imagine that the writer of Juno's Gambit chose Juno the NASA probe to write about accidentally. The thematic connections are really overwhelming. Just as the Roman Jupiter hid himself in a veil of clouds, and Jupiter the planet hid itself in a veil of clouds, Juno the artificial intelligence now takes on the veil of clouds, literally wearing them on its face, as the humans it interacts with attempt to discover its true nature. Is Juno sentient? What exactly does it mean to be sentient?
Systems badly damaged. Processing cores overheating.
And just as the Starborn travels the vast universe, searching for purpose and meaning, Juno is an entity that faces the same dilemma, traveling the universe, meeting humans, and attempting to glean some insight from them to answer that dilemma, incorporating something from each person that it meets, one way or another. And indeed, its story of self-discovery intersects that of each person that it meets, as they each find meaning in dedicating something of themselves to further Juno's story for some time. Please, Bethesda, more of this kind of writing, please.
Context. Joke detected. Request. Be safe. Assumption. We will meet again. Warning. Shutdown sequence initiated.
Only one body. Could be worse.
Oh, and by the way, remember when I said that Juno the NASA probe was meant to deorbit into Jupiter? Well, since it's reached Jupiter, Juno has been so revelatory that NASA has extended its mission twice, and it's still orbiting the planet today. Thanks for watching.